And now, the survival show that once survived watching 15 minutes of an Amy Schumer movie. In this episode, Rhodes Carter of Iron Edison drops back by. We break down and demystify off-grid solar systems. You'll learn the fundamentals so you can power up when the world goes mad. Howdy and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 244. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Rhodes, welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole.
Thanks for having me back. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, we had such a great show last time, and I know I heard back from a lot of people who still had tons and tons of questions, which of course is great because it gives us another opportunity to dive even deeper into the topic of solar. The big thing here is every single prepper I've ever met wants a bug out location, somewhere to go to when the zombie platypus march or whatever their bag is. This is even something personally I'm working towards, is getting an off-grid location. However, my philosophy is always do things that make your life better today and can get you through more interesting times, we'll say. And a remote vacation home kind of fits that bill. Someplace to go to with a family, maybe practice some outdoor skills, decompress, and of course, unplug. So let's approach this episode from that standpoint. To get us to that place, I think the thing that fits all of these needs of a place like that is an off-grid system with a mix of different systems, probably as far as power generation goes. So, and this may help the audience kind of reorient them and get them back into the mindset. Can you give us a quick refresher on the mindset to have? I think you put it best in our last episode as far as batteries versus solar versus other power generation methods.
Sure, Aaron. With the type of system we're talking about today is the battery-based off-grid solar system. As I said in the previous show, the best way to get your head around the way this system is going to operate is don't think of it as a solar system. The solar is not going to be directly powering your home. Think of your home as battery powered, and you've got a solar array that just recharges the battery every day when the sun's shining.
It was funny. The last time you said it, I was like, wow, that really does. And it seems so simple at first, but then you're like, wow, okay, that really does change a lot of the ways you think about these kinds of off-grid systems. And I think we even acknowledged last time, like, this is a really big topic. So how do we break off-grid systems down into their major categories so that it becomes easier to consume and kind of digest?
An off-grid battery-based system, on very simplest terms, there's basically going to be three different components or categories of the system. First part of the system, you have your electrical loads. And this is the same thing that every home in the world has. You've got, certain electrical devices in the home that are consuming energy, and you've got to provide electricity to power those loads. And then after that, you've got the storage device that stores the energy that will be then used to power the loads. And that's, of course, going to be a battery bank of some type. And then after that, you need some type of renewable energy, or not necessarily renewable energy, just a generation source, something that's going to generate the electricity to refill that battery bank or the storage component. Typically in off-grid applications, you're going to be using renewable energy, solar, possibly even wind or hydro, but also very likely you're going to have a fossil fuel generator to serve as a backup just in case, the sun doesn't shine every day.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have some extraordinarily high loads and the solar just can't keep up with it, you need to have a backup. So there's going to be kind of a diverse collection of generation sources as well that will ultimately be powering the house by recharging your battery for you as needed.
That makes sense. So let's start with loads. And I know one of the things that you and I have talked about off air, and we even talked about in the last episode some, was knowing exactly what your electrical loads are going to be, as exact as you can make them, so that the system gets sized properly. And why is that so important instead of just like building a really big system?
Well, in the grand scheme of things, solar systems are not that cheap. You're going to be spending thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars for this off-grid solar system for your bug out location / vacation home. Let's get it right the first time. instead of just taking a stab in the dark and just buying something that's huge and spending potentially even $100,000 if you went really big.
Woo.
It would wind up being complete catastrophic overkill for the home, or you might undersize it too much and wind up in a scenario where the battery dies at midnight because it doesn't have enough capacity to make it through the night. And then, that's not a good situation either. And you wind up having to add on or expand the system later once it's installed. Let's just do it right the first time. It's not that much more work in the grand scheme of things to find out exactly what your electrical loads are going to be and then design a system around what your needs are.
Mm-hmm. So can't you just, and we're talking about like you go through even just counting the light bulbs in a house. Whenever I'm dealing with putting in natural gas generators, we basically just go to the meter and look at the meter and say, all right, what is the consumption like there on an average day or something like that, and then calculate forward. Why not just do it that way with the system? Is it really like you're trying to get it just perfect?
Actually, that is a great way to do it if you are adding solar to an existing home that's on the grid and you have that historical data from, say, your last 12 months worth of utility bills.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a new construction, a home, or it's a home that's off grid, that information isn't necessarily available. And in that situation, we need to find out, what your loads are going to be. Again, if you're just adding solar to an existing home, that's probably a great starting point. And in a lot of cases, if it's just a grid-tied solar system with no battery, a lot of the national level solar companies that we mentioned before, that's really all they do when they're sizing a solar system for a grid-tied, battery-less system. They just pull the last year's worth of utility bills, see how much energy they used, and design a system that'll meet that.
And that's an interesting distinction as far as new construction versus existing construction. And that makes a lot of sense, especially if we're talking about an off-grid remote location. People are probably building something.
That's right, yes. And if you're going to be building something that's fairly comparable to your home you're in right now, as far as square footage, what appliances you have, the number of people living there, you can get pretty close using that method of just using the power bills. But, as I said, this is an expensive system in the grand scheme. Let's do it right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
So, to do a proper load calculation, we actually even here at Iron Edison have a load calculation worksheet that we share with all of our prospective customers. And it's really just an Excel spreadsheet where you go in and you go around the house counting light bulbs, literally, and other appliances. Put in the quantity of each item you have, how many hours a day you anticipate them being on, both in the winter months and in the summer months, because your electrical loads are going to vary from season to season. And this worksheet will then calculate for us automatically how much energy in kilowatt hours you're going to use every day. And then with that number, we can start designing a system that'll suit your needs.
Interesting. So even then, I mean, it still sounds like it's some guesswork. Like how many hours a day am I going to run the dishwasher? And then I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe that's 30 minutes a day on average or something like that. How do you all compensate for that?
You're not going to get it precisely down to the exact kilowatt hour per year that you're going to be consuming. We're getting it as close as we can with the information available.
Yeah. Okay. So,
and then with that, we'll typically try to oversize it just a little bit more.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So you've got a margin for error. When somebody's dealing with new construction, they'll end up working closely with an architect or whoever the builder is to try to make suggestions on, hey, if you do these things, we can bring the size of the system in there, the cost down a bit.
Absolutely. And it's kind of a delicate balancing act, because if you just go way off the deep end with super insulating your home and ultra high efficiency appliances, that's going to add to the construction cost, but it'll bring the cost of the solar system down because you won't need as much. But it might make the bottom line on the entire project more expensive. So there's going to be a balancing act between realistic installation and appliance efficiency, et cetera, versus a realistic size solar system.
Yeah, and I think you and I were talking a little bit the other day, and I thought it was pretty interesting. We were talking about like one refrigerator you were telling us, but can you share that with us again?
Yeah, there is a manufacturer that makes a ultra high efficiency DC powered refrigerator. I got to see one once at a job site, and it blew me away. Literally, the exterior walls of this refrigerator were about 8 inches thick. compared to your normal home refrigerator that's maybe half of that.
Mm-hmm.
Uses very little energy in the grand scheme of things. Plus, it's DC powered, so you don't need to run it through an inverter. It can just be powered directly from your battery. It does save some energy, but that fridge costs 4 to 6 times, I think, what a regular, big box store refrigerator is going to cost. And on top of that, that refrigerator has proprietary components in it, and if it should ever break down, finding someone to work on it is going to be almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to factor that type of stuff in. That refrigerator, that style rather, was very popular back in the early days of off-grid solar in the 70s and the 1980s, when solar systems were very expensive, and you were doing everything you could to minimize your electrical consumption, just to save on the size and ultimately the price of your solar system. Today, that's not really necessarily the case. Today, solar components have come down enough that it's become more practical and more cost effective to wire your entire home just as if it were tied to the grid.
Okay.
Use standard off-the-shelf appliances, light bulbs, etc., and then just have a solar system that might be a little bit bigger in size, but still the bottom line is going to be much less expensive with a slightly larger solar system and regular off-the-shelf components that you can source and have repaired locally.
That makes sense. And there's been a huge push for a variety of reasons over the last few years, or I mean, the last couple of decades now, to make appliances more energy efficient. Now we have LED light bulbs that are way more efficient than incandescent, and not for or against incandescent, just a strict watts discussion. Has that really helped when you're trying to do a solar? Have we really made our appliances and just life in general more energy efficient? Or are we've made it more efficient, but we're just sucking up more juice now?
No, things are much more efficient these days. A refrigerator is probably one of the higher electrical consumers in the home. And if you've got, say, a 10-year-old refrigerator, it's going to be consuming roughly 5 kilowatt hours of energy per day just for that one refrigerator. Older refrigerators can get upwards of 10 kilowatt hours a day. The new Energy Star refrigerators that are out brand new today use 1 to 2 kilowatt hours. So substantially less energy for a brand new appliance. Now, of course, the other argument that I do hear from a lot of people is the older refrigerators and older appliances, they built those things bomb-proof. They last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Brand new ones, they seem to be skimping a little bit on quality of the products, and the life expectancy is a lot shorter.
Yeah. Built-in obsolescence. Gotta love it.
Yeah, and light bulbs are another big one. Incandescent light bulbs were drawing, 60, 75 watts, 100 watts. That's kind of the standard we're used to. Equivalent LED light bulbs draw, less than 10 watts.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, things are much more energy efficient today. And if you plan on that type of stuff, it's still off the shelf, readily available components or appliances. But being brand new, they are much, much more energy efficient. And, if we can keep your energy consumptions down as much as possible, that's going to save you money on the price of a solar system. There's kind of a general rule I heard. This is several years old now, so I don't know if it's still 100% accurate. But every dollar that you can spend on energy efficiency upgrades in your home, that's things like new Energy Star appliances, LED light bulbs, things like that. Every dollar spent there can save you up to $5 on the cost of a solar system.
Oh, wow. That's pretty substantial. But I guess it also does, as you said, there's a sort of bell curve to this, as far as you can get to the point where you're spending crazy amounts of money on a refrigerator, and it may take you forever to recoup the costs of that as far as what it does to your solar system.
That's right. Yeah. So you do as much as you can within reason as far as energy efficiency, upgrades, and design.
We'll be back after this quick break. Listener, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of ITRH? You should see what we do for the Roving Horde Armada members. Check it out today by visiting itrh.net. Members get access to episodes a day early, access to monthly virtual and in-person meetups in some areas, an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival all day long with like-minded people, access to every episode ever produced, by I2RH. That's right, all the way back to the beginning, including one that was never aired. And those are just a few things you get with your membership when you sign up and become part of the I2RH roving horde by going to I2RH.net. Again, that's I2RH.net. What are some of the other considerations that people have to look at when, especially if they're doing new construction? Because replacing windows or re-insulating areas gets kind of pricey in an existing structure. But if we're doing new construction, what are some of those things that we look at that help without going to extreme measures per se, where there's not a cost benefit really, that starts bringing down our overall energy consumption?
Some things you can do is design so you can take advantage of some passive solar benefits, like having lots of windows south facing. So you can take advantage of that solar gain just from the sun shining through the windows, and that can help with your heating expenses in the wintertime, as well as designing so those windows are shaded in the summer months to minimize your cooling requirements as well.
That makes sense. So a lot about just site planning for the new construction.
That's right. And, it's tough to give kind of some global answers because, it depends on where you are in the country and what the climate and the weather is like where you are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because like in Houston, site planning is almost kind of the total opposite. It's like you never want south-facing windows ever, pretty much even in the winter.
Whereas, here in Colorado and in more northern latitudes, you definitely want to take advantage of that solar gain in the winter from south-facing windows. And by planting deciduous trees, the leaves are present in the summer, and that offers quite a bit of shade. But in winter, the leaves are gone, so sun can come passing through those windows and help warm up the home.
Okay, so let's move on to storage. And I've heard, and I think you may have even mentioned this, that the batteries can end up being at least half the cost of an off-grid system.
In general, that's true. Yes, batteries can be around 50% of the total material cost of an off-grid solar system. Labor to install it is above and beyond that. And labor to install a system can fluctuate tremendously depending if you're going to do it yourself or hire a professional solar installer to come in. And if you have very unique / challenging site conditions, the labor costs can be all across the board.
Plus, I mean, you're also, if you're doing it yourself, you're talking about buying the tools, and some of those tools are kind of specialized as far as like specialized torque wrenches and things like that.
Yes, a little bit, but for the most part, installing it yourself, just standard, home improvement grade tools. I tell our customers that if you're an above average handyman, you can install a system just fine yourself.
So with the cost, is it really, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but I'm just curious, is it the manufacturing cost for batteries, or is it just batteries are what they are, that, we can only improve them so much, and really a big chunk of the cost is freight, because batteries tend to be rather heavy?
Yes, that is true. The shipping cost is a significant portion of it, but in the grand scheme of things, not that much. Just cost of manufacturing is really it. Depends on which battery chemistry you're looking at. The lead acid batteries that are kind of have been the standard for solar for decades now, or some of the new lithium batteries that are coming out now. Their prices are dropping just due to popularity and economies of scale.
That makes perfect sense, especially when you have companies like Tesla or whatever who are just going crazy consuming batteries, especially in the lithium area, and all of our devices starting to use those, even down to people's vapor pens and stuff.
Yeah, the energy storage market is really exploding, and it's forecasted to just continue to grow leaps and bounds over the next several years. Because pricing of energy storage is coming down, and it's becoming more and more cost competitive to fossil fuel generation. I'm talking more on utility scale at this point.
Okay, that makes sense. And as far as batteries and storage goes, it was fun. I was playing around on y'all's website, I guess about a week or so ago, and I noticed there's different battery voltages. So you've got 12 volt, 24 volt, 48 volt. Why the range? What's the difference?
There is kind of this misnomer out there that a higher voltage means it's more efficient. That's not necessarily so. The efficiency levels are basically the same across the voltages. It just really depends on if you're going to have a small system, medium-sized system, or a larger system. And to get into this a little more in depth, we're going to get into a little math here.
Okay.
Ohm's law. It's what I live and breathe in my world, designing solar systems.
Mhm.
And Ohm's law tells us that volts times amps equals watts. Or another way to look at it, also volts times amp hours of energy, as opposed to power, equals watt hours. So using some nice round numbers, say we've got a 100 amp hour battery. That's a 12 volt, 100 amp hour battery. 12 volts times 100 amp hours equals 1,200 watt hours of energy. That's how much energy can be stored in that battery.
Mm.
If you go to a 24 volt, 100 amp hour, then we have 24 volts times 100 amp hours is 2,400 watt hours. See, we doubled the energy storage by doubling the voltage.
Okay.
And then the same thing applies going up to 48 volts.
That makes a lot
So
of
if you have a
sense.
smaller, like a one-room hunting cabin type, retreat solar system, a 12-volt system is probably all you're going to need because you don't have very much as far as energy requirements.
Mhm.
Whereas if you have a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot home with a family of 4 in it, your requirement's going to be a lot higher, and you're likely going to have a 48-volt system.
Is there any economy of scale that comes into play in these batteries? With
Not
voltage?
really,
Okay.
because these different batteries, they're actually battery banks, a bank of numerous batteries wired either in series or parallel or both to create that voltage that you need.
So let's get into discharge. And this is not a topic I think people are commonly involved with. And I don't think most people know how easy it is to damage a battery. And so this is another big consideration when people are thinking about what kind of batteries they're going to use for a system.
Sure. With most batteries, let's just start specifically with lead acid batteries. They're the most common battery out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
Batteries in general, you're storing electrical energy in a chemical form. So there's a chemical reaction that takes place when you discharge a battery and then when you recharge it. Now, with most battery chemistries out there, including lead acid batteries, the chemical reaction that takes place when you discharge the battery is not 100% reversed when you recharge it. So that leaves a very small bit of capacity loss with each charge-discharge cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of that capacity loss, it's increased with the deeper you discharge the battery, as well as the frequency that it's discharged. So in the solar world, lead acid batteries, typically you only want to discharge them maybe 30%, 50% at the most. So you're only using the top third to top half of the battery's capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, you're going to get, it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, but roughly about 2,000 charge-discharge cycles, which works out to maybe 5 to 7 years of life.
Okay.
If you're cycling it every day. If you discharge it, down to 80%, using 80% of the battery's capacity, that increases that aggregated capacity loss, and you might get 500 cycles out of a battery then, or a couple years, and then the battery's junk. It doesn't work anymore. Well, it works, but it doesn't have enough capacity to make it through the night or be functional for you, so you wind up having to replace it.
Okay, and so I guess in that instance, that definitely plays into the part of generation, which we'll come to in a bit, making sure that you have enough generation so that you don't have to draw down the battery.
That's right. At least only draw it down the amount you want to maximize the life expectancy of the battery. So that characteristic is true with lead acid batteries and a lot of other battery chemistries out there, including the new lithium batteries as well. Of course, they have a much longer life expectancy anyway, but they still have that characteristic of not 100% reversing that chemical reaction. So the capacity is going to degrade over time with these batteries because of that.
Okay. We've brought up battery chemistry a couple of times. You probably get into it. I don't want to get super deep into the weeds about it today, but share with us a little bit about what are the different types of chemistries and pros and cons and stuff like that for people to consider.
Well, again, lead acid, kind of the standard right now in the solar world. The pros to lead acid batteries, they're readily available. I mean, you can get them most anywhere for the most part. Relatively inexpensive for the purchase price. However, the negatives to a lead acid battery, well, the name right there, lead and acid, certainly not environmentally correct by any means,
Mm.
and very short life expectancy. Depending on how deep you discharge the battery, kind of the standard is about 5-year life expectancy for lead acid batteries. So every 5 years, you have to buy that battery bank again.
Hmm.
So because of that, if you look over, a 30-year period of time, the cost of ownership of lead acid batteries is quite expensive because of the constant replacement expense. Even though upfront initial investment's pretty low, and that's why a lot of people wind up going with them because they're relatively inexpensive. They're not looking 5 years down the road when they have to spend that money again.
Right, right. People tend to be rather short-sighted. But I guess the other thing, too, is for the purposes of this audience where we're looking at looking for as much resilience as we can get and longevity out of things as we can get, especially if we're talking about a remote location or a more remote location that's going to be probably a pain to get to, especially when you're looking at whether it's a freight company bringing it to you, or whether you're loading it in the back of a truck of your own to drag it out to wherever you are to self-install these. That makes a lot of sense. And we also don't want something that, the zombies march and within 5 years you have no power anymore because your lead acid went bad. And I guess the other thing too to think about is, as far as context, to back up for a second, lead acid is what's in our vehicles and golf carts and things like that.
Yes, you have lead acid batteries in your vehicles. It's not exactly the same type of battery. What you have in your vehicles, especially cars and starter batteries, are what's called a shallow cycle battery. They're designed to deliver a lot of amps in a very short period of time to start the engine, but not necessarily, be a more deep cycle battery that you would use on your home or even in your RV, where it's a lower amperage draw on the battery, but spread out over time.
Can we go into that a little bit more? Because that's as far as deep cycle versus shallow cycle.
Sure. A shallow cycle, it's basically a starter battery you'd have in your car.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really designed to have a deep discharge. And because if you do that, they're going to have a very short life. If you deeply discharge your car battery several times, you've taken quite a bit of time off its life expectancy, and you wind up having to replace it a lot more frequently. Deep cycle batteries, they're not really designed to deliver, hundreds and hundreds of amps in a short period of time to start an engine. They're more designed to have a much lighter load, but spread out over a longer period of time. So it's perfect for powering an RV, your home, your solar system, et cetera, where you may, have completely discharge it or, as much as you want to over 24 hours or so, and then recharge it over a 4 to 6 hour period when the sun's shining.
Okay. And it's a battery that, as you said, can have a deeper discharge. So we go deeper into the percentage of the battery that gets used.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So after lead acid, where do we go?
The next big battery chemistry that's gaining a lot of popularity these days is the lithium ion family of batteries. Now, a lot of people don't realize that lithium ion is not a specific chemistry. It's actually an umbrella term that covers, I think, roughly 6 different specific lithium chemistries. In general, lithium batteries, they're much smaller, much lighter weight, which is certainly a big advantage, especially in mobile applications, portable devices like your smartphones, laptop computers, things like that, but also in home energy storage on much larger scale. It's also a sealed, maintenance-free battery. So you install it, you basically forget about it. Backing up a little bit, there's some lead acid batteries that are flooded batteries, kind of like the old car batteries in the 1970s and 80s, where you had to check the water levels and top them off periodically. Some of the lead acid batteries being used today are flooded, and they do require some maintenance like that. Others are sealed, and they don't. So besides sealed and maintenance-free and also just smaller physical size, those are the main characteristics of lithium. Life expectancy is quite a bit longer as well. In the off-grid, just solar storage world, you can see anywhere from 10 to 20 plus years life expectancy from a lithium battery bank, which is significantly better than the 5-ish years with the lead acids.
So is there also significant, a much higher cost with the lithium, using the umbrella term, lithium batteries versus the lead acid?
There is. Lithium's, depending on which specific chemistry and manufacturer, you could be, 2 to 4 times the purchase price of a lead acid battery. But then you look at the extended life expectancy of it, it's kind of a wash there, lead versus lithium. as far as total cost of ownership. But then, you don't have the headaches of having to replace the battery.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right. So moving on to generation, you mentioned in the beginning to think of these systems as being battery powered with a solar battery generator. Let's explore that for a little bit and then even get into the other means of generation to help supplement solar.
All right. Of course, solar is probably the most popular generation source right now. It has been for quite a while, and it's just getting more and more popular because the price of solar panels are dropping so much
Mm.
lately. Just put in perspective, 10 years ago or so, you would be paying roughly $10 per watt for a solar panel. So a 100-watt solar panel could cost, upwards of $1,000. Today, you're paying under $1 a watt
Oh,
for a
wow.
consumer to buy a solar panel. So 300-watt panels are under $200. So, solar has come down tremendously, and that has really added to the advantages of the popularity of solar. Now, solar may not be viable in all areas. There in Houston, it's actually a great solution. But you get into some of the more northern latitudes, the sun isn't shining nearly as much in the winter months, and that can be a design issue. Just you don't have enough solar available for you to keep your batteries charged and support your lifestyle. So other options to look at or that are around wind turbines. They used to be very popular when solar was $10 a watt.
Mm.
But because solar prices have dropped so much, the economics of doing residential scale wind really aren't there anymore. The disadvantages to a wind is, it's a mechanical device that has moving parts. It requires maintenance periodically, and those parts are going to wear out. They can be kind of noisy, and if you want a nice, quiet, experience at your off-grid home out in the woods somewhere, the noise of a wind turbine can be a bit of a negative.
Okay.
Hydro is another great option. Micro hydro is the technical term for residential size. And if you have a viable water source on your property, hydro is definitely the least expensive generation source out there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, but having a viable source
Yeah.
is the key part of that.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have water that's falling a significant distance over a significant vertically as well as horizontally, just to generate enough power to drive a turbine and produce the energy that you need. So with something like that, typically you're going to have hundreds of acres with some natural flowing water, and there might be some water rights issues you need to deal with to get the proper permits in order to use that water for a generation source. So there's a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
logistical things, but if it's viable and available there, it's a fantastic source. The nice thing about it is, for the most part, it's going to be generating 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need nearly as big of a generation source as you do, say, with solar, that's only going to be producing 4 to 6 hours a day, whereas hydro could be generating 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's funny you mentioned it. I was just having a half joking conversation with somebody the other day about how green Las Vegas was because they're primarily powered off hydro, or if not completely powered off hydro, if I remember correctly.
Yes, most of Vegas, actually, the Pacific Northwest has a huge portion of their generation that comes from hydro.
Hmm. So with micro hydro, does it suffer from some of the same issues that maybe wind does? Because those are you're still talking about a turbine and you're still talking about moving parts.
That's right. Both wind and hydro, you're basically converting mechanical energy to electrical energy. So there are moving parts that do have some maintenance issues. The nice thing about hydro is the turbine is not up on a 100-foot tower.
Mm.
So it's much easier to get to and work on, which is a big benefit comparing the two of them.
Going back to solar for a second, are there different kinds of panels? Like there's different kinds of batteries?
There are basically fall into two. Actually, there's several categories. Monocrystalline and polycrystalline panels are the two categories for the rigid roof mount type of solar panels that are out there. There used to be a significant difference between the two as far as their generation capacity per square foot. That has really narrowed quite a bit, as well as the manufacturing costs for monocrystallines were a bit more, but it's gotten to the point now that they're almost neck and neck as far as cost and performance.
Okay.
Beyond that, there's also a different category called thin film panels. Those are the very thin, flexible, rugged, heavy duty ones. You typically see those attached to the top of RVs, or people take them out backpacking just because they're lightweight and very rugged. That's the main advantage to them. The disadvantage to them is the power output per square foot is about a quarter of what the monocrystalline and polycrystalline panels do.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So thin films, you're not going to be putting on your roof in a permanent install type application. Those are more portable, temporary type applications.
Now, as you brought up an interesting point, which is durability, and this has been a concern of mine when it comes to solar, especially being on the Gulf Coast and dealing with hurricanes and high winds and stuff like that. How does that factor into the maintenance of a system and worrying about a system? And
solar panels these days are built very well.
Okay.
They can handle, conditions like you're describing pretty easily. As far as hurricane winds and things of that nature, that's going to be, tied directly to the mounting system used to mount the panels. So if you've got a good racking system to mount the panels on, they should do pretty well in those type of weather conditions. All the panels today, they're covered in a tempered glass, so they can handle, a mild to moderate hailstorm with no problem at all. Things that would, send your car to the body repair shop aren't really going to damage these solar panels.
Are there, for more extreme situations, are there like quick disconnects that can be put in place or anything like that for removing and storage to just get them out of harm's way?
Not that I'm aware of. And, if you're prepping for a storm like that, dismantling a solar array that's, consists of anywhere from 20 to 60 solar panels isn't really practical.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, let's get into generators for a bit, because I know this is a pretty common way of supplementing solar.
It is. A lot of the off-grid battery-based solar systems typically have a backup energy source or generation of some type. Because the sun doesn't shine every day, unfortunately. And you may have, periods where you have exceptionally high electrical loads. Say you've got a bunch of family coming to visit and they're all running their hair dryers because they forget that you're off grid. So it's good to have a backup generation source. Mm. And as I said, a fossil fuel generator is the most common backup to have. Especially in the winter months, I try to design solar systems I'm working on to get through Christmas, because that is traditionally the highest electrical load you're going to have and the least amount of solar production.
Mm.
So if you can make the numbers line up so that you can get through Christmas week, then you've got a great solar system. But doing that may make the price of the system a little too high. So what winds up being kind of the balance is design a system that'll cover 80 to 90% of December and January, and have a generator in place, and just know that you're going to be running that generator maybe every 3 or 4 days for a few weeks around the winter solstice. And then the rest of the year, you still have plenty of generation. So no problem there at all. Plus, You may have, a weather event that comes in where the sun doesn't shine for 3 or 4 days. So you need something to recharge the battery when the solar is not doing it.
Mm-hmm. And we talked last time a little bit about having the secondary source of generation using the newer inverters, the smarter inverters that can handle switching back and forth between these things.
That's right. Yeah, the multi-mode inverters that we talked about on the last program, They have connections for the grid if you're grid tied, a generator plus your battery and solar, and then depending on how you have the system programmed, it'll prioritize those energy sources to keep your loads on regardless of what's going on externally.
And then I guess the other thing to consider is at that point, you also need to have some sort of storage, because if we're talking about an off-grid situation, then we've got to have some way of storing this fossil fuel to run that generator, be it diesel, natural gas, propane, or whatever.
That's right. There are a lot of different fuel considerations with a generator. Propane seems to be the most popular one for systems for our customers, because you can store it in large quantities and it doesn't go bad. It doesn't spoil, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
So you can store this fuel for a year or two with no problem at all. And it's relatively pretty easy maintenance on a propane-fired engine. Diesel, a lot of agriculture customers, they've got a lot of diesel on site anyway for their farm equipment. So running a diesel generator is no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
If you're more in a suburban or urban environment where you have natural gas available, then, natural gas-fired generator is another option. But then, if you're trying to prepare for some apocalyptic event and you're going to be reliant upon a utility service that may or may not be there, depending on what this event is.
Hmm.
That's a negative to maybe using natural gas.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And natural gas itself, as far as a grid tied natural gas system, can be very iffy. They're either really resilient or it's one of those things where it's one of the first things they shut off in a catastrophe.
That's right. So if that's the kind of the area you're headed, where you want to be self-sufficient and be able to take care of yourself for an extended period of time in the event something bad should happen, having a 1,000-gallon propane tank on site and keeping it full, that'll provide your heat, fuel for a backup generator, and even some cooking for quite a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that perhaps we didn't really get into when we were talking about load or storage and other appliances, as far as using a balance of things that use propane or use some sort of fossil fuel in the house to balance out a solar system.
That's right. A lot of people think that, okay, I'm going to be completely green and self-sufficient. I'm going to have an all-electric home and it's all going to be solar powered. That's great. You can certainly do that. But in general, when you use electricity to make heat, it uses an awful lot of electricity. Things like space heating, cooking, hot water heater. If you're using electricity for any of those three categories, you can probably double, if not triple, the size of your solar system just to take care of those electrical heating loads, versus having propane on site and taking care of those various heating loads with propane instead of electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends on what you want and what your needs are. If you definitely, I want to be green, all electric home, sure, you can do it. It's going to cost you, but you can certainly do it.
Mm.
But the economical balance is to use propane or some other fossil fuel for the heating loads.
Okay. So we've broken this all down and gone through the three major categories of load, storage, and generation. How do we then pull it all together and start, in layman's terms, start designing a system, at least in our heads, and kind of playing around with it?
The first step to really properly design a solar system, as we mentioned earlier, is to know what your electrical loads are, both the amount of energy you're going to use per day in kilowatt hours, as well as how much power you need if everything's turned on all at once. The amount of energy you need in kilowatt hours, that's going to help us decide the size of battery we need and how much storage we're going to need. The amount of power that we're going to use if everything's turned on, that's going to dictate how big the inverter is. The inverter being the component that converts that DC energy stored in the battery to the 120 volts AC that powers your home. So once we have those two numbers, let's start looking at the battery. So just for nice round numbers, let's say our home uses the national average energy consumption for a single family home in the US, 30 kilowatt hours a day. The next question, how much time of autonomy do we want? Or basically, how long does that battery need to last before it has to be recharged? There's different schools of thought on this, anywhere from 1 day or 24 hours of autonomy. And there's some people that want to have 3 or 4 days of autonomy. So you could have a 30 kilowatt hour battery up to 120 kilowatt hour battery. Now, as we said earlier, batteries are a pretty expensive component in the system, typically about half the price of the entire system.
Mm-hmm.
That's based on a 1-day battery. So if you want a 2, 3, 4-day battery, your system's getting very expensive very quickly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's where having a backup generator instead of a multi-day battery economically works out to be the best solution.
Mm-hmm.
So for our example, we're just going to have a 1-day battery with our 30 kilowatt hour per day home. So we need 30 kilowatt hours of usable capacity from this battery. Next thing we have to do is look at the battery chemistry options we're going to potentially go with. As we said, lead acid batteries, really you only want to discharge them about 30%. So we need a battery that the top 30% has 30 kilowatt hours of capacity, which means that total battery capacity is going to wind up being close to 100 kilowatt hours. So with lead, you're buying a 100 kilowatt hour battery just to use the top 30 kilowatt hours of it.
Oh, that's an important way of looking at it.
Lithium batteries, you can discharge them 50 to 70%. So for that 30 kilowatt hours of usable capacity, We would need, 60 to 80-ish, actually not even that, maybe, 40 to 60-ish kilowatt hours of battery capacity, total capacity
Hmm.
to satisfy your needs. The other battery chemistry, which we didn't really talk about, is a nickel iron battery. That's another battery that Iron Edison carries. The nice thing about the nickel iron batteries, they will support an 80% depth of discharge.
Oh, wow.
And by discharging them 80% every single day, that battery is going to last 30 plus years.
That's an impressive battery.
So with that, our 30 kilowatt hour needs, we maybe need a 40 kilowatt hour battery bank with a nickel iron battery.
Mm.
So lots of battery options, battery chemistry options. You get the idea of how to size the battery based on what our loads are now.
Hmm.
So now we have sized the battery. Next, we need to size the inverter. And from our load calculations earlier, we have determined how much power we're going to need if everything's turned on in the home. Well,
Mhm.
within reason, because obviously you're not going to have your heater and your air conditioner running at the same time. So we need to get a good idea of how much power the home's going to draw under, extreme conditions, but not super extreme conditions.
Mhm.
So for nice round numbers, say we're going to use maybe 7 kilowatts. That's how much energy, how much power the home would use.
Okay.
So we would get an inverter that has at least 7 kilowatts of inverting capacity. Now, at that point, we've got our storage taken care of. We've got our loads taken care of so we can power the home at least for 24 hours. Once we've used that 30 kilowatt hours out of the battery's dead. We got to recharge it. So we need to design a generation system that will recharge that battery in no more than 24-hour period of time. So if we're using solar, depending on where you are in the country, the number of peak sun hours that you have available to you. I know in Houston, you may have, going from winter to summer, anywhere from 4 to 7 peak sun hours a day. So you've got quite a bit of sun available to recharge the battery. So you don't need as big a solar system.
Mhm.
Whereas you get the more northern latitudes and you're designing around the winter months, for example, the Pacific Northwest or Seattle, that's kind of an extreme situation. In Seattle, they may have 1.5 to 2 peak sun hours a day.
Hmm.
So what we need to do, we got to produce at least 30 kilowatt hours of energy in, say, in Seattle, an hour and a half.
Wow.
So 30 kilowatts divided by an hour and a half, that's going to tell you roughly how big your solar array needs to be.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm guessing if you're in Seattle, it's pretty big.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Versus, in Houston, where, say 5 peak sun hours is what you have, you may need a 6 kilowatt array versus Seattle, you're going to need, 15 to 18 kilowatt array to accomplish the same goal.
Mm.
So that's the general concept with sizing a solar array to match the battery. So, the ultimate goal is to recharge that battery every day so you have the energy you need to make it through the night.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. And speaking of all of this, we've mentioned your company a few times, Iron Edison. Somebody listens to this episode, they decide, this Rhodes guy, he's my brand of wacky. He can help me build my zombie apocalypse bunker. What can you walk us through all the different things that Iron Edison, like what y'all do exactly, especially for those that missed it in the last episode?
Sure. Yeah. Iron Edison Battery Company is literally a mom and pop company here in Denver, Colorado, almost 10 years old now. The core of our business is batteries for stationary, typically solar applications. We started with the nickel iron battery that we just talked about, a 30 plus year, very rugged, heavy duty battery solution. It's 100-plus-year-old technology that Thomas Edison invented back in the early 20th century, designed it to be the forever battery, and it really is what it is.
Mm.
Several years ago, we got into the lithium world. We have a lithium iron phosphate battery that's really gaining in popularity. It is a 15 to 20-year life expectancy battery, much smaller physical footprint, sealed, completely maintenance-free. Install and forget is what I'd like to tell people with a lithium battery.
Mm-hmm.
So the batteries are the core of Iron Edison's business, but we also offer complete solar systems as well as design and the sale of the system, as well as phenomenal support after the sale. We basically do everything to get you from the initial interest stage to having a complete solar solution or off-grid solution designed and installed for you. The installation is the only thing we do not do. If you are an above average handyman, you can install most of the systems just fine on your own, or you can bring in your own solar professional. We also have a network of solar installers around the country that we work with to get a system up and running for our customers.
Very cool. Okay. And of course, the name of the company is Iron Edison. Somebody wants to reach out and talk to y'all and look at your wares or even get on the phone with y'all, get that spreadsheet you were talking about. How do they go about doing that?
Probably the easiest thing to do would just go to our website, ironedison.com. We've got a lot of our products listed there, as well as some educational information, and most importantly, our phone number. Give us a ring. We've got a whole team of system designers. We just love talking to people all day long on the phone, learning about who you are, where you are, what do you want to accomplish. The one thing I really enjoy about working at Iron Edison, we don't just rubber stamp the same system over and over again like a lot of other solar installers do. As one solar professional told me once, we just like to wash, rinse, and repeat. And that is the exact opposite of what Iron Edison is. I like to say I've got a lot of different arrows in my quiver, and I love a good challenge. So if you've got a very unique, bizarre, even situation or application, we'd love to chat with you about it and learn what you want to accomplish and find out the best way for you to accomplish that.
Awesome. And that website address one more time was?
It's ironedison.com. ironedison.com. It's all one word, no dashes or spaces or anything like that.
Awesome. Rhodes, thank you so much for coming back again and taking us even deeper down the rabbit hole of solar.
My pleasure, Aaron. It's always a good time chatting with you on the show here, and look forward to more conversations in the future.
Show notes, links to Iron Edison, and everything from this episode and other resources can be found by going to intherabbithole.com/E244. Support the show and get I2H Roving Horde Armada members only benefits. Go to I2H.net to become part of the Roving Horde Armada. Twice a month, members get private virtual hangs. These are a chance to hang out with me and other like-minded everyday preppers and discuss whatever's on your mind. You know, the things you just can't talk about with anybody else. You'll also get access to every episode I2H has ever produced, the on-demand access bug-out bag class, special prepper spreadsheets, an invitation to the I2H Armada secret Facebook group, and that's just to name a few things you get when you go to I2H.net and become part of the Roving Horde Armada. Again, that's I2H.net to find out about the exclusive members-only benefits. With that, we wrap up episode number 244 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.